The first time I heard my name used like a weapon. It wasn't in an office or a courtroom, it was in a wedding hall filled with white flowers and expensive laughter. The bride was my college friend, the kind who posted sunrise photos and believed kindness could outlive gossip if you smiled hard enough. I had come to celebrate her, to sit quietly at the edge of the crowd, to eat sweet cake, and go home early because Monday meant another week of deadlines. Then a voice cut through the music like glass. "Nora Hale," it called, loud enough to bounce off chandeliers. "Tell everyone, did you take that hush payment from Westbridge once? Or did you lie about it too?" For a heartbeat, I didn't understand the question, because it was the wrong accusation for the wrong person in the wrong place. Then I saw her. Cassie Van, a coworker famous for wearing saintly smiles while planting knives behind your back. She stood with her phone raised as if she were filming a confession, eyes glittering with the confidence of someone who believed shame was a button she could press on command. The room went quiet in a way that felt hungry. Strangers love a scandal because it makes them feel safe from their own. My friend's wedding became a stage, and my name became a prop. In the old version of my life, before I learned how power really moves, I might have tried to explain. I might have smiled politely and said something soft, hoping the storm would pass. But I wasn't soft anymore. Not after 3 years at Helix Harbor Group, not after watching good employees swallow injustice until it became an ulcer, and not after discovering that Cassie's favorite hobby wasn't gossip, but control. She didn't want truth. She wanted leverage. So I breathed in, lifted my chin, and answered as if I were speaking at a board meeting. "I've never taken a hush payment," I said, voice carrying farther than hers. "So I can't give you tips. But since you brought money up, Cassie, should we also ask whether your charity fund invoices are real? Or whether the vendors are just your cousins with new emails?" The silence turned sharp. Forks froze midair. People leaned in. Cassie blinked, and for a moment, her face lost its costume. She had expected me to fold. Instead, I had opened a different file. She recovered fast, because she was practiced. "What are you talking about?" she snapped, too loud, too defensive. The bride's mother tried to laugh and redirect attention. But curiosity is stronger than manners. Cassie's friends, women who giggled at her cruelty because it made them feel protected, shifted uncomfortably. My friend's groom looked like he wanted to disappear. Cassie pointed her phone at me again. "You're changing the subject because you're guilty," she declared. "Everyone knows you climbed fast at Helix. Everyone knows there were arrangements. I could have attacked her with rumors, the same cheap weapons she used. Instead, I attacked her with something she couldn't easily survive. Precision." "Everyone knows nothing," I replied. "But I know you scheduled this. You picked a wedding because you wanted witnesses. That's fine. I like witnesses too." I turned to the room and smiled politely. "I'm sorry to the bride and groom," I said, "for this interruption. Let's end it quickly. Cassie wants a public accusation, so she'll get a public answer. I didn't take any hush payment, and if she has evidence, she can submit it to authorities. Otherwise, this is harassment." Cassie's mouth opened, then closed. She knew what she had. A rumor dressed up as certainty. She had expected the room to do the rest, whispers, judging eyes, the slow social suffocation that makes a target quit. She hadn't expected me to name the structure of the attack out loud. In the end, the bride's cousins escorted Cassie out. Cassie walked backward for a moment, refusing to surrender the spotlight, then threw me a look that promised revenge. I watched her leave and felt something I hadn't expected at a wedding. Relief. Not because I had won a verbal duel, but because I had finally stopped pretending peace mattered more than dignity. Monday arrived like a consequence. At Helix Harbor, the air always smelled faintly of coffee and printer toner, and the fluorescent lights made everyone look a little exhausted. My best friend at work, Jules, leaned over the divider and whispered, "So the wedding thing is everywhere." She didn't say the word everywhere like a location. She said it like a virus. I didn't have to ask what she meant. My phone had already filled with messages from coworkers who wanted details, coworkers who pretended they didn't care while asking anyway, and coworkers who had always disliked me and now had a reason to act righteous. The office loves morality when it can be used as entertainment. Cassie was walking from desk to desk with a wounded expression, telling people she had only been concerned, that she had asked one harmless question, that I had attacked her out of nowhere. The better the liar, the more innocent they sound. She approached my desk at 9:17 a.m., holding a folder as if she were a professional. "Nora," she said sweetly, "we need to clear the air. HR wants to talk." I looked up and saw the small tremble at the corner of her mouth, the sign that she was angry her plan hadn't worked perfectly. Of course, I said, standing. I love documentation. Cassie's eyes flickered. Some people hate that word the way roaches hate light. We walked to human resources together, like two actors entering a scene that would decide which one the company would sacrifice to preserve comfort. HR was managed by a man named Bram, who believed neutrality was the highest virtue even when neutrality protected harm. He sat behind a polished desk, hands folded, face carefully blank. Cassie sat first, posture dramatic, as if she were about to receive an award for bravery. Bram gestured at me. "Nora," he said, "we've received complaints that you made defamatory statements about a colleague at a public event. This impacts company culture." I almost laughed. Culture. The word companies use when they want to discipline the person who refuses to be quietly mistreated. I sat down and asked, "Before we discuss culture, can we discuss why an employee used a private wedding to accuse another employee of financial misconduct?" Bram blinked. Cassie cut in quickly. "I was worried," she said. "I heard things. I thought transparency mattered." Transparency, another word people use as camouflage. I opened my phone and placed it on the desk. "I recorded the interaction," I said. Cassie's face tightened. Bram's eyes widened. "You recorded a wedding?" he asked, unsettled. "I recorded the moment my reputation was attacked," I replied. "And I recorded it because I expected this meeting." Bram's mouth opened as if to scold me for preparation. I didn't let him. "Also," I continued, "I didn't make up rumors. I asked Cassie a question about invoices because she used money accusations to shame me. If the company wants to investigate, I welcome it. I will provide a list of vendor records, purchase orders, and email chains relevant to Cassie's projects." Cassie's hand clenched on her folder. Bram's blankness faltered. He hadn't expected me to bring numbers to a feelings fight. Cassie leaned forward, voice syrupy with threat. "Nora has always been intense," she said. "She's obsessed with spreadsheets. She sees conspiracies everywhere." I smiled. "Spreadsheets are only scary when you've hidden something in them," I replied. Bram cleared his throat and tried to regain control. "We're not here to conduct audits," he said. "We're here to address interpersonal behavior." I nodded. "Great," I said. "Then address the interpersonal behavior of public humiliation. If you decide that's acceptable, please put it in writing so the rest of us can adjust our expectations." Bram stared at me as if I had slapped him. Cassie stared at me like she wanted to. Then Bram ended the meeting with a vague warning to keep things professional. Professional, in his language, meant stop making us uncomfortable. I returned to my desk and discovered Cassie's real strategy wasn't to win with HR, it was to isolate me socially while she worked elsewhere. Within hours, I noticed small changes. I was removed from a project chat. Meeting invites arrived late. Files I needed were suddenly missing. Cassie's people smiled at me with the sweet emptiness of strangers. That's how office bullying works when it wears a blazer. No bruises, just slow erasure. In the past, I would have suffered silently, hoping performance would protect me. But performance doesn't protect you from someone whose goal is to control the narrative. So I stopped playing defense. At lunch, I went to the finance archive room and requested a report access review under a policy most employees forgot existed. Helix Harbor was a holding company with 3 subsidiaries: logistics, healthcare supplies, and a small but lucrative baby products line called Lullaby Lane. Cassie worked in administration for Lullaby Lane, where marketing budgets were thick and oversight was thin, because executives considered it a soft division. Soft divisions are where sharp people hide theft. My role, officially, was analyst support for logistics. Unofficially, I was the person managers came to when numbers didn't reconcile, and they needed someone to blame. I knew the company's arteries better than Cassie knew her own lies. 2 years earlier, a senior executive chairwoman, Linnea Ark, had asked me for a quiet favor. She had been in a hospital, pale and alone, waiting outside a department most people avoided discussing in public. I had recognized her because she was the face of Helix Harbor, the person investors trusted, the symbol the baby products division used to sell family values. She nearly collapsed, and I had caught her arm before she hit the floor. In the panic, a paper slipped from her hand. I saw a word I wished I hadn't: genetic screening, severe risk, procedure scheduled. She saw my expression and understood instantly. Instead of threatening me, she did something rare in powerful people. She told the truth. She explained she was ending a pregnancy for medical reasons, and she needed privacy not out of shame, but out of strategy. A scandal would be weaponized against the company's baby products brand. She asked me to pick up medication and handle paperwork so she could leave quickly. I agreed, and I promised silence. Silence, that day, was not surrender. It was protection for a person who had shown me humanity. I kept that promise. But Cassie had discovered fragments of it. An image, a rumor, a chance sighting. She had assumed the woman outside that department was me, because in her mind, women like me were always doing something shameful. Her imagination filled the gaps with the ugliness she carried. Now she was weaponizing that misunderstanding to crush me. The irony was brutal. Cassie was lying using a truth that wasn't mine. And the truth belonged to someone who could end Cassie's career with one sentence. The problem was that truth, when mishandled, becomes collateral damage. I needed a way to stop Cassie without exposing Chairwoman Linnea's private medical history. That meant I needed a different lever. The lever arrived in the form of invoices. Lullaby Lane ran quarterly. Community outreach events, photo ops with donated strollers and smiling executives. Cassie managed logistics for those events. The vendor list looked normal until you zoomed in. Repeat vendors with slightly altered names. P.O. boxes instead of office addresses. Payments that landed right below the threshold requiring a second signature. The pattern was familiar. Fraudsters don't always steal large sums. They steal steady sums, because steady sums don't attract attention. I pulled 6 quarters of records and built a timeline. The numbers told a story even when people didn't want to. By Wednesday, I had mapped a network of shell vendors connected through shared phone numbers, shared tax IDs, and shared routing codes. Someone inside administration was redirecting funds. Cassie's name appeared on approvals, not the top-level approvals, but the operational approvals where paperwork becomes invisible. I could have sent the findings to internal audit. I didn't. Because internal audit at Helix Harbor was a decorative department designed to protect executives from external regulators, not to protect employees from internal predators. I needed to go higher, but I also needed to be careful. If Cassie realized what I was doing, she would destroy evidence and blame me. I had seen this before in my previous life, the life that ended in smoke and a locked door. The lesson was simple. When you corner a liar, you must already have your exit. So I created 3 exits. First, I backed up every record to an encrypted drive stored outside the office. Second, I wrote a memo that explained the pattern in plain language for someone who didn't speak finance. Third, I booked a meeting with Chairwoman Linnea's executive assistant under the pretext of a data integrity concern in Lullaby Lane's event budgeting. I didn't mention Cassie by name. I let the system's hunger for self-preservation do its job. Companies care about employees only as long as employees don't threaten profits, but they care about protecting the brand like it is their first child. And this fraud threatened the baby products brand. The meeting happened in a quiet conference room on the 28th floor. Executive air, executive silence, executive water bottles. Linnea herself entered, not in the glamorous way she appeared in brochures, but in the decisive way she moved when she wasn't performing. She looked at me for one long second and said, "You look like someone who keeps promises." I nodded. "I do," I replied. She gestured for me to speak. I did. I explained the shell vendors, the threshold splitting, the routing codes. I did not mention hospitals or medical departments. Linnea's expression did not change until I slid 1 page across the table, a chart showing the money siphoned from a supposed charity budget into accounts linked to Cassie's network. Linnea's eyes sharpened. "Who authorized this?" she asked. "Operational approvals," I said. "Names, timestamps, and device logs are in the appendix." Linnea exhaled slowly. "How long?" she asked. "At least 18 months, I replied. Linnea nodded once. "Good work," she said. "Now we do this quietly and thoroughly. And Nora, thank you for not bringing the wrong truth into the room." By Friday, Helix Harbor's legal and compliance teams were moving like a storm behind closed doors. Cassie didn't know yet. She was still performing victimhood, still stirring whispers, still sprinkling my name with poison online under anonymous accounts that used words like promiscuous and dirty, because she believed those words were universal keys to destroy women. The posts escalated, and my parents back home began receiving calls from strangers pretending to warn them about their daughter. Someone mailed a wreath to my building with a fake condolence card. It was grotesque. It was also evidence. Harassment that leaves trails can be prosecuted. Cassie didn't understand that her favorite weapon, the internet, cuts both ways. Monday morning, HR sent an email to all staff, a reminder that internal gossip, defamation, and harassment were violations subject to termination. People pretended not to know why the memo existed while immediately trying to find out. Cassie strutted through the office with a smirk, as if she had forced the company to acknowledge her pain. Then, at 10:40 a.m., 2 compliance officers arrived at Cassie's desk and asked her to come with them. Cassie laughed at first, thinking it was about me. Her laughter died when she saw Linnea's name on the authorization form. That's the thing about powerful truth. It doesn't shout. It simply shows up with badges. Cassie's reaction was not remorse. It was outrage. She shouted that the company was unfair, that someone was framing her, that she had been targeted because she was a woman. She used the language of victimhood like a shield, the same way she had used morality at the wedding. But compliance isn't moved by theater. Compliance is moved by documentation. They showed her the vendor network. They showed her approval logs. They showed her the email where she instructed a junior admin to rename a vendor to bypass a review threshold. Cassie's face drained of color. For the first time, she had nothing to perform except panic. She tried one last pivot. She screamed my name. "It's Nora," she cried. "Nora set me up. Nora's the one who—" She stopped because Linnea had stepped into the open office behind the compliance officers, and Linnea's gaze was an icy silence that made everyone freeze. Linnea spoke calmly. "Cassie Van," she said, "your employment is suspended pending investigation. Also, the harassment of an employee named Nora Hale will be addressed legally. We have already identified the accounts responsible." Cassie's mouth opened and closed. She looked around for allies. Even her friends avoided her eyes. Cowards love cruelty until cruelty threatens them too. The next weeks were exhausting. Investigations are not cinematic. They are long, procedural, and emotionally messy. Cassie was terminated. The company pursued civil recovery. The district prosecutor filed charges related to fraud and cyber harassment. Cassie's husband, who had once appeared at office events smiling politely, filed for divorce after seeing the evidence of her lies and affairs. People whispered about her downfall the way they had whispered about me. Because the office doesn't change. It only changes targets. I didn't enjoy it. I didn't celebrate. I simply felt the strange calm of someone watching an equation balance at last. Linnea issued a public statement for the brand. Lullaby Lane would launch a foundation supporting families facing severe genetic conditions. The statement was framed as corporate responsibility, but I recognized the private truth under it, a woman turning pain into structure instead of shame. Investors applauded. The brand gained goodwill. The stock rose. The internet, fickle as weather, shifted from devouring rumors to praising transparency. Some people called it strategic. They were right. Strategy can be compassion with a spine. As for me, I didn't become a saint. I didn't become a heroine. I returned to my desk, to my spreadsheets, to my life. The difference was that the air felt lighter, like someone had finally opened a window. Jules brought me coffee and said, "You just survived the office apocalypse." I shrugged. "I filed receipts," I said. Apocalypses hate receipts. A month later, Linnea offered me a role as her special projects coordinator, part analyst, part integrity watchdog. It was a promotion, but it was also a message. The company would rather place someone like me near the top than risk another Cassie hiding in the margins. I accepted, not out of gratitude, but out of intention. If I had learned anything, it was this. If you're going to live inside a system, you either become a tool for someone else, or you become a guardrail. On the anniversary of the wedding, my friend invited me to dinner. She apologized for what had happened that day, as if she had personally handed Cassie the microphone. I told her she had nothing to apologize for. People like her, I said, look for bright rooms because they want an audience. It wasn't your fault the room was bright. My friend squeezed my hand and asked if I was okay. I thought about the wreath, the posts, the whispers, the way my name had almost become a cage. Then I thought about the conference room on the 28th floor, the quiet sentence Linnea had said, "Thank you for not bringing the wrong truth into the room." I realized that this was what growth looked like. Not becoming invulnerable, but becoming precise about what you protect. That night, back in my apartment, I opened a blank document and wrote one line. Never let someone else's shame become your silence. Then I saved it in 3 places, because I had learned that redundancy is respect for reality. Outside, the city hummed. indifferent. Inside, I felt something rare, a sense that my life was mine, not because the world had become kind, but because I had learned how to hold my ground without burning everything around me. Cassie had tried to ruin me with a rumor. I had ended her with an audit. The difference wasn't cruelty. The difference was proof. The investigation didn't end with Cassie being walked out of the building. It only changed shape. Compliance can suspend a person, but it can't suspend the appetite that allowed the person to feed. Within a week, Linnea's legal team asked me to sit in a windowless room with 2 attorneys and a forensic accountant and go line by line through the Lullaby Lane budgets I had flagged. They weren't looking for drama. They were looking for exposure radius. Fraud is rarely a solo act. It is more often a permission structure that tells one person, quietly, that no one is watching. We found more names than I wanted. Not masterminds, more like enablers. A procurement clerk who rubber-stamped approvals because she hated conflict. A marketing director who ignored anomalies because the events made him look charitable. And an IT contractor who created temporary vendor profiles that never got deleted. Cassie had been the loudest face of the theft. But the theft had been a chorus. Linnea didn't try to save the chorus. She cut contracts, reassigned staff, and ordered a full audit across subsidiaries. Executives complained about disruption. Linnea replied, "Disruption is what happens when you ignore rot." Cassie tried to weaponize the audit the way she had weaponized the wedding. She posted a tearful video claiming she was a whistleblower being punished for speaking up about corruption. She named me as her attacker and hinted at the hospital rumor again, floating it like bait for a hungrier internet. In her version, she was brave and I was vicious. The comments split into predictable tribes. People who hate women in power. People who hate women who don't smile. People who hate anyone who interrupts their entertainment. My name trended locally for 12 hours. It felt like being boiled alive in public and expected to stay polite. Linnea's lawyers advised silence, because silence keeps lawsuits clean. I agreed, but I didn't stay passive. I documented Cassie's statements, compared them to internal records, and prepared a packet for the prosecutor. Cassie's fraud charges were now tied to cyber harassment. Her lies were no longer office drama. They were part of a pattern of intimidation. Patterns are the only language the law consistently respects. Cassie's next move came through a subpoena request. Her attorney demanded access to my emails, my Slack messages, my personal device logs, anything that could be twisted into motive. It was classic reversal. If she could frame me as obsessed, she could make my evidence look like a vendetta. The legal team expected me to panic. I didn't. I had learned, in earlier disasters, that panic is a luxury you pay for later. I handed over my work devices willingly. I insisted on protective orders for private content. I asked the attorneys to put every request in writing. A bully's favorite habitat is ambiguity. Paper kills ambiguity. In deposition, Cassie performed vulnerability like a costume. She cried on cue. She described herself as a single mother, as if motherhood were immunity. She called me cold and calculating, as if those were crimes. When it was my turn, her lawyer asked why I had attacked her at a wedding. I answered, I didn't attack her. I responded to a public accusation with a public boundary. He asked why I had looked into her invoices. I answered, because financial misconduct is relevant when someone accuses you of taking money you never took. He asked if I hated Cassie. I answered, my feelings are not evidence. The invoices are. The court reporter typed every word. Cassie's lawyer looked frustrated. He wanted me emotional because emotion is easier to discredit than arithmetic. After the deposition, Jules met me in the parking garage and handed me a bottle of water like it was a medal. How do you stay so calm? She asked. I considered the honest answer. I had been calm since childhood, not because I was strong, but because other people's chaos required someone to carry the stairs. Instead, I said, because calm makes liars impatient. Jules laughed, then stopped laughing when she noticed a car idling near the exit. The driver's window was tinted too dark. The car followed me out of the garage and stayed 2 lengths behind for 3 blocks before turning away. Cassie had friends. Or Cassie had hired someone. Either way, intimidation had moved from screens to streets. Linnea upgraded my security quietly. Not bodyguards, because optics, but drivers, who were actually trained, and a building access audit that exposed how easily strangers could enter my lobby. Some neighbors complained about new cameras. I let them. Privacy is usually defended by the people least at risk of losing it. The audit across subsidiaries created collateral friction. Managers resented me because I had become a walking reminder that their shortcuts could be counted. Bram from HR started using the word culture again in meetings, warning that fear would damage morale. He didn't mean fear of fraud. He meant fear of consequences. Linnea let him speak, then asked one question. Do you believe employees should fear predators or rules? Bram hesitated. Hesitation is an answer. Linnea said, then we choose rules. That was when Bram tried to make me the problem. He scheduled a wellness check-in with a consultant, implying my work intensity was unhealthy. It was the gentlest form of discipline. Pathologize the person who documents harm. The consultant's questions were polite, but the purpose was obvious. I answered with the same precision I used in finance. My workload is high because your reporting pathways are weak, I said. If you want me to work less, improve the pathways. The consultant blinked, wrote something down, and ended early. Bram's strategy backfired because it had relied on me apologizing for being functional. A week later, Priya knocked on my office door. She looked different now, still anxious, but less crumpled. They said you're the reason I'm not fired, she said. I corrected her. You're the reason you're not fired. You told the truth. Priya swallowed hard. Cassie told me no one protects people like me, she said. She said leaders only protect themselves. I said, some do. That's why you build records. Records outlive moods. Priya nodded, and for the first time she asked a question that wasn't fear-shaped. Can you teach me? So I did. Not mentorship as a fairy tale, but mentorship as tools. How to flag threshold splitting, how to verify vendor identities, how to save emails properly, how to write notes that hold up in court. Priya learned fast, and watching her competence grow felt like a quiet form of restitution for the damage Cassie had done. Cassie had treated Priya like an accessory. I treated her like an analyst. The more we tightened controls, the more resistance surfaced. A senior director in logistics, Marek Sloan, approached me with a smile that was too smooth. He praised my diligence and suggested I focus on Lullaby Lane and stop looking at other departments. The request was dressed as support. The subtext was threat. I asked why. Marek said audits were expensive, and the company needed to move on. Move on is another phrase for bury it, I replied. Moving on without fixing the leak is how ships sink. Marek's smile stiffened. He left. And that night, my access to several finance folders was revoked. I informed Linnea. She didn't act immediately. She asked me to wait. Waiting, when it's strategic, is not surrender. 2 days later, Linnea called a leadership meeting and announced a temporary access restructure. Marek looked satisfied until the compliance officer handed him a notice. His department would be the next audit target. Linnea didn't accuse Marek publicly. She simply turned the light toward him. Light creates panic in people who prefer shadows. Marek responded with sabotage. He leaked a partial version of my fraud memo to a business blogger, stripping context so it looked like Helix Harbor was collapsing under internal corruption and that I was a rogue employee spreading fear. The blogger published it with dramatic language. Investors asked questions. Linnea's PR team prepared a statement. Linnea stopped them. We will not lie to soothe the market, she said. We will show the truth and show the fix. She released the full memo, the audit plan, and a timeline of corrective actions. The market dipped briefly, then stabilized. Transparency cost money at first, then it saved money because it prevented a bigger crisis. Strategy. Again, wearing the clothes of ethics. Marek's leak gave the prosecutor something useful. Proof that internal actors were trying to interfere with an active investigation. The prosecutor subpoenaed Marek's communications. Within a week, Marek was placed on administrative leave. The office watched the downfall the way it watched everything with hungry curiosity. People asked me if I felt satisfied. I told them satisfaction wasn't the point. The point was that predators rely on the assumption that no one will follow through. Follow through is rarer than talent. Cassie, meanwhile, tried to bargain. Through her lawyer, she offered to plead to lesser charges if the company dropped the cyber harassment claims. Linnea refused. Cassie's harassment had reached my parents. It had reached my building. It had sent a wreath like a curse. Linnea didn't do mercy for optics. She did it for meaning, and this was not a moment for mercy. Cassie eventually accepted a deal that included restitution and a no-contact order. She never apologized. She never admitted she had been wrong. She simply lost the microphone. The no-contact order didn't erase the damage, but it changed the air. For the first time in months, I could walk into the office without expecting my name to be a trap. I still watched corners. I still saved backups. But the pressure eased. On a Friday evening, Linnea invited me to the foundation office, not the public-facing space with photo walls, but the back room where the letters were stored. She didn't show them to me. She simply said, "Sometimes I wonder if I did the right thing by turning private pain into public structure." I answered carefully. "You didn't turn your pain into spectacle," I said. "You turned it into policy." Linnea nodded once. "Policy survives me," she said. "That's the point." I realized then why Cassie's wedding ambush had failed. Cassie had expected me to be ashamed, because shame makes people controllable. But the truth she tried to weaponize wasn't mine, and I refused to steal it. I refused to let someone else's private grief become a public weapon. That refusal had forced me to find a different lever, one built of evidence, not humiliation. It wasn't noble. It was disciplined. Discipline, I had learned, is the opposite of the chaos bullies feed on. There was no grand celebration after the case is closed. Systems rarely reward guardrails with applause. There was only the quiet recalibration of routines. Fewer missing files, fewer last-minute accidental meeting exclusions, fewer anonymous accounts whispering poison. Priya grew steadier. Jules stopped flinching when gossip started because she'd watched proof win. Bram from HR updated policies he had once ignored, because now he understood that neutrality can become liability. The office didn't become kind, it became more careful. Sometimes careful is the first step toward better. And as my role expanded, I noticed a strange thing. When people realized I would document without drama, they started bringing me their quiet problems. Not because they loved me, because they trusted the math. They wanted someone who wouldn't turn their pain into entertainment. I could give them that. If this were a simpler story, it would end with applause. Mine ended with a checklist, a locked drawer of letters, and a company that had learned, reluctantly, that consequences are real. That was enough. Before the year ended, I attended one more wedding, smaller, quieter. No chandeliers, just string lights and a backyard. I stood near the food table and watched people laugh without hunting for a target. When someone made a joke that could have turned cruel, another person redirected it gently, and the room followed the kinder path without making a show of it. I realized then that my fear of bright rooms had never been about light. It had been about audiences. An audience can be a witness, or it can be a mob, and the difference is whether anyone in the room believes dignity is worth more than entertainment. On the way home, my phone buzzed with a message from Priya. A vendor had submitted paperwork with mismatched tax IDs, and she had caught it before payment. She wrote, "I flagged it and documented everything." I replied, "Good. Keep going." The city was still indifferent, but inside our small corner of it, the rules were changing. One receipt at a time. Later, the company tried to disinfect the scandal with a mandatory training on workplace conduct. People rolled their eyes in the cafeteria, joking about Ethics Week as if ethics were seasonal. But I watched their faces instead of their mouths. The ones who laughed the loudest were the ones doing quick math about consequences. Bram from HR delivered the presentation with the same neutral voice he used to protect discomfort, and I learned a useful detail. When institutions are forced to acknowledge wrongdoing, they often choose performances that keep power untouched. So I made sure the performance had teeth. I drafted a revision of the vendor onboarding checklist and routed it through procurement with cross-checks. Cassie's network could never survive tax ID validation, routing code comparisons, threshold splitting flags, and a rule that any vendor touching community outreach funds required independent verification. The procurement director complained it was too strict. I smiled anyway, because strictness is what stops predators from calling themselves efficient. That same week, my parents called every night for a week, frightened by strangers who pretended concern while fishing for gossip. I kept my voice calm partly for them, partly for the younger version of me, who still hated being watched, and I explained what I now believed. Storms pass faster when you move to higher ground instead of standing at the center trying to argue with the wind. I told them I was safe, that I had documentation, that the company's legal team had already traced the harassing accounts. They didn't understand corporate warfare, but they understood consistency, and consistency soothed them more than any reassurance. Not long after, legal counsel taught me that harassment cases are won by patterns, not by feelings. So I organized screenshots, timestamps, phone logs, and witness statements in a binder that looked boring enough to bore a bully into despair. I didn't do it because I craved revenge. I did it because I refused to let truth rely on memory alone. Cassie's anonymous posts were traced through a chain of careless logins on the same cafe, Wi-Fi entitlement disguised as cleverness, and watching her confidence collapse under the weight of her own laziness taught me a simple truth. Cruelty often isn't genius, it's convenience. In the following month, the junior admin Cassie had manipulated an anxious girl named Priya asked to speak with compliance. She arrived shaking, clutching a notebook full of dates, and confessed through tears that Cassie had promised mentorship while threatening her job. Priya had renamed vendors, split invoices, and forwarded emails because Cassie had taught her fear in professional language. Linnea didn't let Priya become collateral. She arranged protections, relocation options, and a clean internal transfer, then met Priya once and said, without softness but with clarity, "If you tell the truth, we will not punish you for being afraid." Priya cried harder at that sentence than at any accusation. People underestimate what it does to be believed. Meanwhile, the foundation Linnea launched, framed publicly as corporate responsibility, began receiving letters from parents who had never spoken about their children's diagnoses before. They wrote about shame, about silence, about doctors' offices where the air feels like judgment. Reading those letters, I understood something I hadn't at the wedding. Some secrets are burdens only because society insists they should be. Linnea didn't show the letters to investors. She kept them in a locked drawer and read them alone, then turned that private weight into structure. Funding for counseling, legal aid, and medical navigation. Strategy can carry compassion without collapsing. Afterward, I learned which coworkers had quietly protected me and which ones had fed the rumor because they liked the taste of moral superiority. I didn't confront them. Confrontation is nourishment for people addicted to drama. Instead, I updated my map of trust. I removed certain names from sensitive channels. I stopped answering their friendly questions. I kept my work correct and my distance consistent. In offices, distance is sometimes the most honest boundary you can set. The bride later told me several guests had secretly thanked her for that dramatic show, as if humiliation were entertainment to be graded like a performance. She apologized again, eyes tired. I reminded her that weddings reveal character the way heat reveals cracks, unwanted, but informative. She laughed weakly and said she wished her happiest day hadn't become a lesson in cruelty. I told her the lesson wasn't cruelty. It was clarity. Cassie had chosen a bright room because she wanted an audience. The room had been bright. The rest had been Cassie. On my first day as Special Projects Coordinator, Linnea told me, without ceremony, that integrity work is lonely because it forces people to face what they'd rather ignore. I told her loneliness is easier than being complicit. Linnea nodded like she'd been waiting to hear that from someone who meant it, then handed me a folder labeled Quiet Problems. Inside were cases that didn't make headlines. A manager quietly blackmailing an assistant with performance reviews, a vendor quietly offering kickbacks to a procurement lead, a department quietly punishing whistleblowers by cutting them out of meetings until they quit. The company's biggest crimes were often small enough to hide in routine. My job was to make routine visible. Months passed. The scandal faded from the public feed, but it didn't vanish. It settled into policy. The new checklist reduced vendor fraud attempts so fast that procurement started calling it Nora's firewall. Bram from HR avoided my eyes in hallways. Jules teased me for becoming the corporate ghost story. I didn't mind. A ghost is something people talk about because they can't control it. I preferred being uncontrolled. One evening, Linnea stopped by my office after everyone else had left. She placed a mug of tea on my desk without asking, the closest she came to tenderness. "You kept your promise," she said. I understood she meant more than money. She meant my silence in the hospital, my precision in the boardroom, my refusal to weaponize the wrong truth. I replied, "You did too." Linnea's mouth tightened, then softened by a fraction. "Good," she said. "Then we keep building a place where Cassies don't thrive." Back in my apartment, I opened a blank document and wrote one line, "Never let someone else's shame become your silence." Then I saved it redundantly, because backups are a kind of respect for the real world. Outside, the city kept moving, indifferent as weather. Inside, my life felt mine not because the world had become kind, but because I had learned how to hold my ground without burning everything around me. Cassie had tried to bury me under a rumor. I had answered her with an audit. It wasn't cruelty that separated us. It was evidence.